Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to the Kiwi Lads channel. In this video, I'm going to be previewing the second test match between the Wallabies and the Springboks that is happening as part of the Rugby Championship round 4. But if you do enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. But nonetheless, let's get straight into this preview. Right, so this game is going to be a 7:05 PM kickoff New Zealand time, 9:05 AM kickoff in South Africa, and it is going to be played at Suncorp Stadium, a stadium that the Wallabies have not lost at since 2016, so a little while. They've played a few games there as well. And also at Suncorp Stadium, their record up against the Springboks is 4 wins and 1 loss, so that is very impressive for the Wallabies, and they will be hoping to continue their winning form that they found last week, beating the Springboks 28 points to 26. Very close game, went down to the wire. Clay Cooper is a name that has been thrown around quite a wee bit this week because of the fact that he was able to kick 8 from 8 for his kicking statistics, which was very impressive, including nailing the last kick of the game to win the Wallabies that game by 2 points. But it is still all to play for the Springboks. They are a side that haven't lost too often in the last little while. So because of that, we know that they are going to be coming out firing in this game, and they are going to want to right the wrongs that they had in that last match, including some of the stats that we are going to be talking about in this preview. But just to go through quickly what this preview is going to be, the first part is going to be looking through the starting lineups and reserves of both sides, looking at the changes that they have made and comparing the two sides in this match. Then the second, we are going to be looking at last week's fixture in terms of what went wrong or what went right for both of these sides and what can be improved in the coming match. And then the third, we are going to be looking at player stats and all that good stuff that comes along with these matches that we are seeing. Rugby Championship round 4 already here, and then next week there is a very big match for both of these sides. In some regards, the Springboks taking on the All Blacks for the 100th time. That's going to be an absolutely incredible game. And then the Wallabies taking on the Pumas, a side that they drew twice with last year. So I feel like those two games next week, I am hyped up for them. But this week, we have still got 2 matches, and this is the first of 2. And it is going to be a very entertaining one due to what happened last week and how we get to see the Springboks adapt in this one for this coming week. But looking through the starting lineup of the Wallabies first, they are the home side at Suncorp Stadium. Last week it was actually considered a home game of the Springboks, but this week it is going to be the Wallabies who have got the home crowd advantage, and there should be plenty of members of that crowd because we are at Brisbane. Suncorp Stadium holds a lot of fans, and there will be a lot cheering for the Wallabies to see if they can get 2 in a row. But looking at the starting lineup, first of all, they have got 2 changes in that front row, and that is going to be James Slipper in the number 1 jersey coming in for Angus Bell. Then the next change is going to be Taniela Tupou starting this match, and that is rather than Alan Alatoa. Now, Taniela Tupou starting this match is pretty strategic from the Wallabies. Now, last match he came off the bench and he was causing all kinds of problems for Oxnard off the bench of the Springboks, but this week he is going to be starting and he is going to be scrummaging up against the returning Trevor Nakanye, and I'm very curious to see how this goes because Taniela Tupou, he has become a known name in terms of a super sub for the Wallabies, but he is going to be starting this one, so now we'll get to see what he can do at the start of a match rather than when it is the last kind of 30 minutes. Looking through the next change for the Wallabies, and we've got to look way down to the number 9 jersey, and that is going to be Nick White starting this one rather than Tate McDermott, who will be coming off the bench instead. Now, it's interesting because of the fact that Tate McDermott, he is quite a nifty little fellow when it comes to around the side of a breakdown. I'm not sure whether or not that is how he would like to describe himself, but he plays a very smart strategic game round that side of the breakdown, although I do remember one intercept pass that he did throw straight into the hands of Lucanio Arm, and we saw Nick White come off that bench, and he did look pretty dangerous when he did come off that bench in the later stages of the game. But the big thing here is that the Wallabies, they will need to make sure that they're constantly getting that go forward. We actually saw it work pretty well in that first game up against the Springboks. The likes of Samu Karevi, Rob Valentini, always just making meters, which is something we're not really used to seeing teams up against the Springboks do because of the fact that they're so good at shutting you down with that defensive wall that just doesn't seem to want to budge. Although the Wallabies, they were able to break through once, but the big question is, if they were only able to break through once this weekend, would it result in being enough to get a win for the Wallabies? We will have to wait and see. But that is the last change that the Wallabies have made in that starting lineup. Looking at the bench, in the number 17 jersey, it is going to be Angus Bell coming off the bench rather than starting, like I mentioned a little bit earlier on. New name in the number 18 jersey, it is going to be Tom Robertson of the Western Force. So he will have a big opportunity later on in this game to go up against, unfortunately for him, it's going to be Stephen Kitsov. Not exactly an easy man to make your way out onto the field to face in a scrummage because Stephen Kitsov very strong with that scrummaging, which is why maybe they've decided to go with him for later on in the match rather than the likes of an Oxnashare, who was under a little bit of pressure when he was put up against Taniela Tupou last week. Looking at the next change, the Wallabies, they have also decided to change their spare lock. It was Rob Leota last week, didn't really get too many minutes, but now it is going to be the young Darcy Swain of the Brumbies. He was in a few of those matches up against the All Blacks. Is actually quite a threat at the line out as well, Darcy Swain, which is maybe why they decided to go with him off the bench. Could be looking at a rolling maul later on in the match for the Wallabies, or just wanting to make sure that he can get one of those line out steals, which could be absolutely crucial for the Wallabies, as we did see 3 rolling maul tries for the Springboks in the last match up against the Wallabies for round 3 of the Rugby Championship 2021 competition. So only a few changes here for the Wallabies in their starting lineup and reserves, and the same can be said for the Springboks. Looking through their starting lineup, it is going to be in the number 1 jersey rather than Stephen Kitsoff. It is going to be the returning Trevor Nakanye. Very good when it comes to those scrums, and also is just a physical presence out on that field for the Springboks. So he will be hoping to have a decent performance in that starting jersey for the Boks for this match. Then you look at the locks, and it is going to be Lou Diaga who will be missing out in that number 5 jersey. Rather than him coming in there, it is going to be Marvin Orie for his second start in international test matches for the Boks. Now, something that is of note is the fact that his first test start was in the number 4 jersey when they were resting Etzebeth a few weeks ago. So now he is going to get the opportunity to start in that number 5 jersey alongside Etzebeth, and that's going to be exciting to see what they can do there. But Lou Diaga is a big hit to the Springboks to not have him there, as he is very good in the line out, claiming that ball so that rolling maul can keep rolling and they can get their way to the try line multiple times perhaps in a match, depending on how the Wallabies can shut down that rolling maul. But it's one of the best in the world, if not the best in the world, that rolling maul of the Springboks. You just can't stop it unless you end up dragging it down, and then from there you go into the bin. Unlucky son, but we will have to wait and see whether or not that will be the case in this game for the Wallabies. Looking through at the rest of the Springboks lineup, it is exactly the same as it was last week. The only other change that the Springboks have made this week is the fact that instead of Oxnashare coming off the bench in the number 17 jersey, it is going to be Stephen Kitsoff, like I mentioned a little bit earlier on. So not too many changes for the Springboks. And what that says to me is the fact that they are backing these guys to be able to get this win over the Wallabies. They have said last week it went wrong, but this week we are going to prove why we are the best team in the world at the moment, and we are going to be trying to push our way towards maybe a bonus point, because at this stage in the Rugby Championship, bonus points count, and they were able to get one last week, a losing bonus point for being 7 or less behind the opponent, and that now means that they are sitting on 10 points in second place. In first, it is the All Blacks sitting on 15 points with a very good points differential of plus 91. The Springboks points differential at this stage sitting on plus 37. Then looking at the Wallabies, because of that win, they do get their first points of the Rugby Championship. They are sitting on 4 points with a points differential of minus 50. And then Argentina at the bottom of the bunch at this stage, they are sitting on 0 points with a points differential of minus 78. But who knows, maybe the match after this game between the Wallabies and the Springboks will show that they were able to get some points. We will have to wait and see, but they are going to be playing up against the All Blacks in their second test match, and then next week they are going to be taking on the Wallabies, like I mentioned a little bit earlier on. Now we will move on to a little bit more of a match analysis from the last match that did take place, and something that I'm going to mention straight away is the fact that the pack weights have changed for this match. I have got them built in at 914 kgs for the Wallabies, 913 kgs for the Springboks. Now those stats could be completely wrong, but hopefully they aren't too far off in that regard. I know that last week the Springboks, they did actually have about a 30 or 40 kg pack advantage in terms of that weight, whereas the Springboks now in this game up against the Wallabies, they're going to be very even, which means scrum time, I would put it down to the fact that Taniela Tupou is going to be out there. He's an extra 15 kgs heavier than Alan Alalatoa, who was playing in the last match. So because of that, his extra little bit of a shunt, and I mean it's not really a little bit of a shunt, it is Taniela Tupou, he will be able to really put a big push in. So that's going to be a lot of pressure on the man marking up with him, Trevor Nakanye, coming straight back from injury. That is just a battle with the big men in the front row, which is exactly what you expect to see from these two sides in this game. Few scrums, but when it does go to a scrum, we're going to see some force being extracted between those two sides. So the front row of the Wallabies for this one does have that extra 10 kg advantage with 358 kgs compared to the 348 of the Springboks, whereas last week it was vice versa and the Springboks were the heavier in that front row. But looking through match stats and match analysis that I have picked up on from watching the game back a few times, I did learn a little bit of a worrying stat for the Springboks. We know that they kick the ball a lot throughout this match. So one of those stats that I have learnt from looking at the game and tallying it up is the factor of, in that first half, the Springboks, they did a lot of kicking, as we know. From those kicks, they were able to retain the ball 3 times, 2 of which either bounced or they ended up getting a little bit of a deflection and being able to claim that. So they were only able to take 1 ball clean, and that was the challenge between Nkosi and Korombeti, that he was able to drag that one down. Other than that, though, they had 3 kicks for territory, and here is the big stat. 10 times in that first half, they kicked the ball away into the possession of the Wallabies. And that is a huge stat, because at the end of the day, that is not a very high retention rate of your kicks. So if you are doing so many of those kicks, it does mean that the possession stat, I believe at halftime, it was around 66% for the Wallabies, and that stat shows why, because of the fact they just keep giving the ball back to the Wallabies to be able to have a run with it, give it to Samu Kerevi, who would then just try and hit the ball up, making meters as well, Samu Kerevi, anytime they gave him that little bit of space. So that is something that I think the Springboks really need to make sure they get right in this game up against the Wallabies, is if you are going to put up a kick, you need to make sure that, for one, it is going to be a decent enough kick that maybe you've got a chance of retaining that position, or 2, maybe don't go for so many of those kicks in that first half, because we did see for the Wallabies in those games up against the All Blacks, they were able to have 60% or more possession throughout all of those matches of the 3, so they have been able to get very close to that in this game. I believe they had 57% of the possession at full time, and the Springboks, they were only left with 43% to be able to do something with. And I have to say, when they had that ball, they were able to get themselves 3 rolling maul tries. They were able to score the 3 tries to the 1 of the Wallabies. So if they can keep that ball for just a little bit longer and really cause the Wallabies to get a little bit more fatigued, I think this game at Suncorp could be quite a tough one for the Wallabies, although that home crowd advantage, I have to say, Suncorp, it seems to do weird things to the opposition sides. The crowd are right compact around you at Suncorp, and it's pretty much like a pressure cooker, and you've got to make sure you can handle the pressure, just like, I'm going to say it, Quade Cooper did last week. He seemed like he was just the Iceman out there. He was cool, calm, and collected throughout that whole game, and that is what the Springboks will have to make sure that they are for this game at Suncorp Stadium. But they are the world champions, and they have shown in the past that they are able to handle pressure. So I am curious to see what the Springboks do in terms of that kicking game, but also in terms of just trying to get their hands on the ball a little bit more. Now, we saw in that first game as well, both sides receiving 2 yellow cards, the first of which coming for Sia Khaleesi for a tip tackle. The second was actually going the other way, and that was actually the yellow card to Matt Phillip on the line of the Wallabies, which did get him sent off the field for 10 minutes. Then we saw a deliberate knockdown from Willie LaRue that did cause him to get a yellow card, and then we saw a no-arms tackle to the leg from Folau Fainga'a, which then got him carded. So discipline for both of these sides. They won't be too happy with it. I believe the split for penalties in this game was 17 against the Wallabies and 11 up against the Springboks. So 28 penalties throughout this game, which is just a few too many for either side's liking. So they have to make sure that discipline is another important factor that both sides take into consideration for the game this weekend. Now, next we will be talking about player stats, and there are some interesting ones here for both sides. Starting with the Springboks, the man who carried the most meters for the Springboks was Duane Vermeulen, and he had 45. That was the most out of any Springboks player, and that just showed that unfortunately the backs just weren't quite getting that ball as often as they possibly should. The perfect example of this is Mapimpi. He was out on that left wing. He had a touch very early in the game, and of that carry, he was able to beat 2 defenders and also make 9 meters. And that was the only carry we saw from Mapimpi the whole match that has been registered, which means he didn't make any meters throughout the whole rest of the game. We're talking about 70 minutes worth of having a world-class winger like Makazole Mapimpi out on that wing, and they just didn't use him. He was trying to get under the high ball. The ball just wasn't quite sticking to his hands, unfortunately for him. He did have a couple handling errors in that regard, but if they pass it out the back line, it is the saying of the ball will always beat the man. And if you give it out to the likes of a Mapimpi, he could have possibly been able to beat a few more defenders when he had the ball in hand. And Kosi, he didn't actually beat any defenders, but he did only have 2 touches in this game with his 10 meters made for that man. But other than Duane Vermeulen, no one really even got closer. I believe the second most was actually Andre Pollard with 22 meters carried from 6 carries, and he was in the number 10 jersey. So that was about as far out the back line as we actually saw the ball going for a lot of this match, with him and also de Klerk kicking very, very often throughout the first half. A little bit less in the second, but by then it was one of those situations of the damage, unfortunately for the Springboks, had almost been done. But that is something that they can fix, I think, relatively easy. The Springboks, they're just going to make sure that they're kicking a little bit less, and when they are kicking, it is one of those ones that it is contestable, and if you do retain that ball more often than not, then it could be a different story for some of those wingers and the backline, such as a Damien Delende Lukanyuam, and also your wingers in Mapimpi and Nkosi. Now looking at the Wallabies stats, and those stats for the Wallabies aren't actually that much higher than the Springboks in some regards. Like, you're looking through some of the numbers here. Samu Karevi, 46 metres carried from 17 carries. 6 defenders beaten, 1 clean break. Very impressive from that man. Second was Andrew Callaway, who was able to score that first try of the match for the Wallabies, the first and only, I should mention there. He was able to have 32 metres carried, 4 carries, 4 defenders beaten, and 1 clean break as well. And like I mentioned, picking himself up the try. Then also, you have got Rob Valentini on 32-30 for Marika Korombedi with 6 defenders beaten as well from him. Very impressive. And then Michael Hooper also sitting on 30. So a lot more running meters coming in this match for the Wallabies compared to the Springboks. Almost a whole 100 extra. 280 for the Wallabies in this one and only 183 for the Springboks. Now, defenders beaten is another stat that is very impressive in regards to the Wallabies. 21 defenders beaten for them compared to the 6 that the Springboks were able to beat. Tackles next. The Springboks, they had to make quite a few of them. 120 tackles made, but they did miss 21, which is actually a lot higher than we're used to seeing for the Springboks. That is actually only around that 80% mark of tackles being completed, whereas for the Wallabies, they were able to make 74 tackles and only miss 5, which was very impressive up against someone like the Springboks. But then I go back to it once again, when you do kick the ball away as often as the Springboks did, unfortunately you just don't quite get that possession, which would lead to you being able to get those defenders beaten stats up on the board and maybe open up that opportunity for a bit of that backline. I'm hoping we do get to see it this weekend because they've got a world-class backline, the Springboks, and if they use it, they can be extremely dangerous. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do this weekend up against the Wallabies at Suncorp Stadium. Should be a very entertaining match for this one. And then straight after it, we have got the All Blacks taking on Argentina as well. So talking about tackles now, I will go to some of the players who did stand out in the last game. Franco Mostert able to make 13. Lutiaga also able to make 13. And then Stephen Kitsoff was able to make 12 for the Springboks. Those are the 3 who do stand out in terms of the stats from the last match. Then for the Wallabies, there is only one man who was close to double figures, and that was Lockie Swinton, making 9 tackles and getting 1 turnover won. I think the rugby will be a lot more free-flowing than it was in the last match between the two sides. I think both sides would have calmed the nerves. It was a huge occasion for the last week. The first time we had seen the Springboks play the Wallabies in quite some time, so now they have had that little bit of a warm-up, I guess you could say, of this game last week, and now it's going to be into this one, and this one is a must-win for the Springboks because, or else, if the All Blacks win their game up against Argentina with the bonus point, the only way for the Springboks to win the Rugby Championship would be if the All Blacks were to lose to the Springboks and the Springboks were going to be able to score a bonus point win for both of those matches, which would mean they would have to beat the All Blacks by 3 or more tries in both fixtures, so they cannot afford that. And at absolute worst for the Springboks here, they need to make sure they receive at least 1 point, but they won't be going for the 1. They will be going for the full 4, and then maybe just add 1 more onto that, depending on how it goes. But nonetheless, that is almost going to be the end of this preview. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We are going to be back with our watch-along live stream that we do on the channel every single time we have a Rugby Championship game, or pretty much any game of rugby around the world. We are covering it on this channel, so be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, let me know your score prediction in the comments below. Let's see if anyone can get out 100%. But nonetheless, thank you all very much for tuning in, and I will see you all in the next one.